feeling quite spring-like. The northeast of England will also end the day dry with plenty of sunshine. There'll be a brisk southerly wind, especially along the coast, and temperatures will dip quickly after sunset. There'll be a west-east split across Scotland this evening with dry and sunny weather for eastern areas and cloudy conditions in the west with a little rain possible. Patchy cloud and sunny spells across Northern Ireland, but thicker cloud and rain also approaching from the west throughout the evening. The winds will increase too. Cloud, rain and stronger winds will edge in from the west overnight, the rain turning heavy at times over western hills. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, it's 4 o'clock. Hello, welcome to GB News. I'm Nana Akua. We are live on TV, online and on your digital radio. And for the next few hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of those big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. Now, this show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. Joining me today is broadcaster Danny Kelly and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Amankona. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 4. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Talks between Ukraine and Russia are about to start as the Russian Foreign Ministry says the two sides are arriving at the meeting point. President Zelensky's office confirmed earlier that the talks are taking place on the border between Belarus and Ukraine and that both delegations are meeting without preconditions. Ukraine's foreign minister says Belarus has given assurances that it won't get involved in the war during the negotiations. President Putin's order to put nuclear deterrent forces on high alert is dangerous rhetoric and irresponsible behaviour. That's according to NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg. The White House says it's part of Moscow's pattern of manufacturing threats. Chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, says Russia's timetable is not working and Putin is trying to intimidate the West.
Perhaps in a sense of almost panic by Putin in suggesting it's now firstly time for talks. That seems a bit premature given that it's only day 4, and now almost referencing the nuclear deterrent as if to somehow get us to become rattled, to intimidate us and so forth. We need to stand firm. We need to hold our ground.
Tobias Ellwood. Kharkiv's governor says Ukraine is still in full control of its second largest city after Russian forces entered early this morning. Intensive rocket artillery exchanges overnight have been followed by heavy fighting in the area. The Ukrainian president said the night had been brutal, with shelling of civilian buildings. He also announced that he's setting up a foreign legion to bring in volunteers from abroad.
They are fighting against everyone. They are fighting against all living beings, against kindergartens, residential buildings, against ambulances. They use rocket artillery, missiles in city districts where there are not, and never were, any military facilities.
Well, President Zelenskyy also says Ukrainian forces have held off Russian troops advancing on the capital. That, as the mayor of Kiev confirmed there are no Russian troops in his city. Vitaly Klitschko said that in total 31 people have died in the capital since the attack started, including 9 civilians, and 106 people have been injured. 368,000 Ukrainians have already fled for Poland, Moldova and other neighbouring countries. The United Nations is warning that number could grow to 4 million if fighting escalates. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has confirmed that the UK will take refugees fleeing the war. The Deputy Defence Minister for Ukraine says Russia has lost around 4,300 men so far in the invasion, as well as 146 tanks and 26 helicopters. Irina Desipio is the president of the Revived Soldiers of Ukraine. That's a US charity organising aid. She told GBNews that her parents have fled Ukraine to Poland and her brother is fighting to defend his country. She says Ukrainians are fighting with their bare hands and the invasion will incur big Russian losses.
Our privilege is that we know territory. We own our land. We know every corner. We know every house. So for Russians, it's much harder to come in and fight. That's why they're losing a lot of people. I can't believe Putin is sending his own people to die, because they will die.
Well, in other news, police forces in England and Wales have recorded the highest numbers of rapes since Sarah Everard's murder almost a year ago. The Office for National Statistics also recorded the second highest number of sexual offences since April last year. Miss Everard was killed by serving Met officer Wayne Couzens in South London in March last year. Rail firms are ramping up services that had been cancelled due to COVID. Avanti West Coast and East Midlands Railway are bringing back lines cut in December and January. For those coming to London, North Wales and Chester will get a second daily service to and from the capital. And trains from Manchester and Birmingham to Euston will be doubled from Monday. OK, this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's return to Nana Akua.
It's fast approaching 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, Vladimir Putin, an old-school dictator, fighting a war in an old-school style that simply won't wash. Putin forgot about the internet, and in particular, he forgot about things like Facebook and TikTok, which even he can't control, and thank God for that. The Russian troops amassing on the borders were captured by TikTok, images that the rest of the world were able to see with their own eyes, the horror that was actually unfolding, not manipulated by mainstream media coverage, the sort of stuff that you might watch on Russia Today, but accounts from real people with their real experiences the truth impossible to silence. He thought that he would simply line up his troops around the border and then take Ukraine in a Chechen-style manner, and that is pretty clear warning to the West that Russia will respond immediately and the consequences will be such as you have never seen in your entire history. All the necessary decisions in this regard have been taken, would mean Ukraine would be abandoned by the rest of the world. He even added, "I hope that my words will be heard." Let's unpack that. I will attack anyone who dares get in my way by providing air support, because at that point I've lost and therefore have nothing to lose. So sod the lot of you. It's pretty clear to me that he's talking about nuclear weapons, and even now there are reports he's moving Russia's nuclear deterrent to special alert. No wonder totalitarian regimes want to silence voices. They want to hide their misdemeanours. You only need to look at China. Let's take COVID. What do we know about COVID and the true story about how it evolved? Very little. And their ties with Russia? They've kept that a secret. And places like North Korea are, well, a complete mystery. The notion that their leaders would face a questionnaire for breaking rules would be farcical in those countries, because the rules simply wouldn't apply to them and anyone daring to speak out wouldn't live to tell the tale. Whilst rulers of countries with these totalitarian regimes look on and see the will of Western nations like ours to destroy our leaders on the strength of things like Partygate, or they see bungled, so-called world-beating track and trace things that we supposedly put together, or the hypocrisy when we talk about removing links to slavery whilst we consume their goods, many put together by slaves in their countries, they must see weakness. But whilst I don't agree with many of the nonsense narratives that are emerging in this country, I will fight for the freedom, the right of freedom, for people to express them. Their very expression allows the lunacy of them to be challenged, and that is a sign of strength. The fact that we in Western democracies allow our ideologies to be challenged renders dictators like Putin powerless. Dictators like him understand the power of freedom of speech. It means that they can carry on without question, and it must stick in his craw that he cannot control it, and in particular online. Yesterday, apparently the Kremlin's website went down and Russian TV channels were hacked to play Ukrainian songs. The takeover was by a group called Anonymous, a proficient group of hackers from all over the world, and a stark reminder to Putin of things that are out of his control and the havoc that they can wreak. He's underestimated the lengths that people will go to fight for this freedom, and it will cost him dearly. He is basically the class bully, and if he doesn't get his own way, he'll try to flush everyone's head down the pan. But he can't. Thank God for freedom of speech. So before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. We'll bring you all the latest on the unfolding crisis in Ukraine throughout the show. Negotiations between Ukraine and Russia are due to go ahead shortly at the border between Belarus and Ukraine. But Vladimir Putin has put nuclear deterrent forces on high alert amid tensions with NATO. So what does it all mean? We'll be unpacking that with a host of experts. In the Great British Debate this hour, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine has raised concerns about military preparedness here in the UK and whether cuts to defence spending have left us vulnerable. So I'm asking, are British armed forces ready for war? And in our Worldview segment, we'll be digging into the fascinating story behind the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, a former comedian who's emerged as a strong international leader in a time of war. Plus, as ever, we'll hear what you think about the events in Ukraine in the latest instalment of GB Voices. That's coming up in the next hour. You can get in touch with everything we're discussing by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, or why not send me a tweet at GBNews. Right, let's get started. Welcome again to my panel, broadcaster Danny Kelly and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Amankona. So welcome, thank you very much for joining me both. It's really good to see you again. So let's talk. I'll start with you, Albi, because I mean the whole what I was really trying to say is that freedom and being able to express views, even though we don't agree with them, is a real strength. And we should stop looking at ourselves as if, oh, well, you know, they've watched Partygate, see how weak we look and all this sort of thing. Because actually the strength of being able to express that without fear of persecution is something that we hold dear in this country. Where do you stand on what's going on and your thoughts on Vladimir Putin?
My thoughts on freedom and free speech are pretty much exactly the same as yours, Nana. It is a privilege that we have in this country and in the West to live in a Western liberal democracy where we're free to express views. And if we come across views that we disagree with, we debate them. We debate them civilly, politely, and well, rather than descending into war, as we're seeing in Ukraine. And I think it's absolutely shocking that we are seeing a state-on-state warfare in Europe. You know, tanks rolling through a European capital and civilians' residences being bombed by an enemy state. I don't think that's something any of us would have thought we'd ever seen in our lifetimes. And I feel that perhaps the West, and particularly Europe, has become a little bit complacent with our way of life, thinking that things were just always going to go in this liberal direction. And we've been shown that that's not necessarily the case.
Very, very eloquently put. Danny, what's your view?
Well, of course, freedom of speech is a privilege that we enjoy in this country, but freedom of speech isn't necessarily readily available in Russia, ironically. And he can control the internet to a certain extent. He already regulates heavily what Facebook posts.
Well, he's tried, but it's not quite working out for him.
No, it's not. But to say to infer he's impotent when it comes to things like that. The Russian people I feel sorry for, I think they've been indoctrinated by this guy, who by the way...
But they're not stupid, and they do also have the internet, so they could look.
Yes, yeah, correct, but they don't have freedom of speech. The internet is heavily regulated. As soon as Putin needs a bullet in the head as soon as possible, because he could cause the next world war.
Just on the very quick point about the Russian people, Danny, one of the things that I have been really felt quite pleased about was that we've seen thousands of people protesting across Russian cities. I believe around 1,000 Russians have actually been arrested by the Russian authorities for protesting. We've seen, Russian public figures come out, like the tennis player who in Dubai wrote on the camera, "No war, please." You know, this isn't necessarily something which we saw happen with Crimea or with Georgia in 2008. So I think there is a sense that maybe this war isn't as popular with the Russian people as Putin would like it to be. And I think what we need to do in the West is think about what can we do to influence the minds of the Russian people, because that is what is probably going to scare Putin the most.
There needs to be an uprising, a military coup even. There needs to be some change with the leadership of Russia. And Poland, for example, have refused to play Russia in the football. Formula One refused to have Russia host the Formula One race. And little things like that will all add up. Boycotting Russian vodka. People are now starting to boycott Russian vodka. But my point is that all of these little tiny things, piecemeal, will actually get the Russian public so angry with this guy that maybe there will be some sort of uprising. I'm sure one of the generals, it's so unpopular, this war. There's no bogeyman.
Well, I mean, I don't think we need to be careful.
Except him.
Well, we need to be careful with comments about, Putin and that sort of assassination thing. Only for the fact that we are in a situation which is a war situation. We don't really want to incite anything to make things worse in terms of Russian. But let me just make a point about all of this now. And I hear you saying we need to do things like that, but there are things we could be doing which we're not doing. And we talked about the SWIFT banking system, but that was only the SWIFT banking system that is the interbanking connectivity. That's not the SWIFT payment system for the gas that we're consuming. So we've left that open, you see. So we are very selective about what we're saying and what we're doing. And I think that we need to take a reality check here and get on with doing things that will really cause Putin damage, in a sense, rather than talking about it, pretending we've done everything available when we haven't. We simply haven't.
I completely agree with you, Nana, but one thing that we do have to be careful of, and this isn't often something which is discussed, is that if we totally exclude Russia from SWIFT, there are other international payment systems available. For example, the CIPS
the Chinese system,
the Chinese system. And if Western sanctions against Russia push China and Russia closer together, and then that becomes a stronger union, if you will, then that could damage Western security in the future. So I do think we are walking on a tightrope with sanctions at the moment. Yes, I want there to be more sanctions, but I absolutely do not want that to cause more instability in the future with the rise of China.
No, but my point is that we are saying that we've, pushed them out of the SWIFT banking system, and we haven't.
No,
so that's
right.
what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I think it's a good idea. I think we could do something much better than that. I don't know, I'm heading towards Danny's line, but, that's, but what I'm saying is when they're saying that we have taken them out of SWIFT massive banking system.
Yeah.
It's not entirely true.
Maybe I was clumsy earlier on, but I don't think anyone would shed a tear if he was to die, Vladimir Putin. And I don't think it's...
Yeah, but it's not that. It's not that.
No,
we
know,
can't incite violence against anyone, even if they are horrible.
I think you can against Putin.
No,
He's
well, you can do it in your house, but not on TV.
No, OK, but I'm speaking like a normal, everyday bloke in the street. This guy now has put his nuclear army regiment on a war footing.
But didn't we know that? That's what he was saying when he was saying that he will atrocities.
So me suggesting that the world would be a better place if he died, I don't think that's unreasonable.
I think we have to be careful if people were to infer that you were calling for Putin's assassination.
I am.
I think we've got to be quite careful.
No, we do have to be careful.
Why do you have to be careful?
Well, it's quite simple, Danny, because it's my show and I don't fancy being taken off air, so we'll stop there.
I don't think you'd be taken off air for that.
Well, you know, maybe you will be. But I'll be honest with you, we can't speak like that in a respect, only because, and it's not that people wouldn't think that is a right move, it's just simply that we can't incite that on air. That's as simple as that. And I'm afraid that's just how it goes. But, you know, if we come back to the idea that we need to do something, what is it that you think we can do? I mean, Albie, have you got any... Because we look at the sanctions, they don't seem to be doing very much. I understand you don't really want to push Putin into the arms of China, although China are quite intelligent and abstained from the vote in the UN Council. So they're in there, but they're ready to come over and take over the whole thing, I suspect. So what else can we do?
I think we need to be building a much stronger military presence on the NATO-Ukraine border and on the NATO-Russian border to really show Putin that actually, if you are even thinking about invading a NATO nation, we mean business and we will defend ourselves. And I don't necessarily think that has been happening enough, or at least it's not been being spoken about enough by our leaders. I think the stance that Boris Johnson has taken on this has actually been remarkably strong. Even when he was Foreign Secretary, he actually dealt with the situation with Salisbury remarkably well. And I think that's coming back now. And I just think we really do need to be much more tough in how we're talking and also how we're treating people like Russian oligarchs who holiday in Europe, who have their children educated here in Britain at our top elite private schools, at our elite universities, who have properties in London, and really start to limit this kind of lavish lifestyle that a lot of rich Russians are used to. And then maybe they'll start thinking, no, we actually want to keep our nice lifestyles and therefore we need to be imposed.
Yeah, there has to be pressure, third-party pressure put on this madman. OK, forget the incitement to violence, but politically there needs to be third-party pressure put on him. I hope there's a political uprising amongst the citizens of Russia. 1,000 people arrested just shows you the measure of this guy, how paranoid and petrified he is of any sort of democracy. I genuinely believe, though, little bits and bobs of cancellation of Formula One, of football, of tennis, of any commercial enterprise that we have a relationship with Russia, just to hurt them, so that collectively they say, we've had enough of you.
Well, just so the people themselves can see the impact of all these things will have on their everyday lives, rather than just watching, well, you've just, you've brought a tank through, you've killed a load of people, well, that's war, fair enough. But if it actually starts to directly affect people and their everyday business, then perhaps it might help to make a difference. Right, so, well, you let me know your thoughts. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Still to come, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, are British armed forces ready for war? Send us your thoughts. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk. Tell us what you think. You can also send me a tweet at gbnews. And we've currently got a poll up asking that question. Are British armed forces ready for war? Cast your vote, but first, it's the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, the UK is looking fine and sunny with a little cloud and rain possible in the west. Let's take a look at the details. Turning cloudier in the southwest this evening. The cloud could be thick enough to bring the odd spot of rain for a time. It'll be breezy, especially along southern coast. The southeast of England will end the day with continued dry and sunny conditions for all. There'll be a brisk southerly breeze. Increasing amounts of patchy clouds will continue to spread eastwards across southern and western Wales this evening. It'll turn increasingly breezy here too. In contrast, it'll be a fine end to Sunday across all parts of the Midlands. There'll be plenty of sunshine with a rather brisky southerly breeze, feeling quite spring-like. The northeast of England will also end the day dry with plenty of sunshine. There'll be a brisk southerly wind, especially along the coast, and temperatures will dip quickly after sunset. There'll be a west-east split across Scotland this evening with dry and sunny weather for eastern areas and cloudier conditions in the west with a little rain possible. Patchy cloud and sunny spells across Northern Ireland, but thicker cloud and rain also approaching from the west throughout the evening. The winds will increase too. Cloud, rain and stronger winds will edge in from the west overnight, the rain turning heavy at times over western hills. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 24 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. And it's time for the Great British Debate. And this hour I'm asking, are British armed forces ready for war? Negotiations between Ukraine and Russia are expected to go ahead at the border between Belarus and Ukraine. But the conflict is still raging on, with Vladimir Putin putting nuclear deterrent forces on high alert today. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is calling on foreign fighters to travel to the country and take up arms in the battle. UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has ruled out sending British troops to Ukraine. But the ongoing conflict has raised concerns about military preparedness in the UK and whether cuts to defence spending have left us vulnerable. So, would British armed forces be ready for war if need be? I'm joined by Colonel Richard Kemp. He's a former British Army commander and former chairman of Cobra, who has written a piece in The Telegraph titled "The Age of Conventional Warfare is Back and Britain Isn't Ready." Colonel Kemp, thank you for joining me. So what do you make of the situation in terms of the UK's preparedness and the situation with our armed forces? Are we ready?
Well, the first thing I'd say is we as a country and also as an army have done a huge amount to support Ukraine. That includes providing thousands of anti-tank missiles and training 22,000 Ukrainian soldiers. So we've done a great deal. But as to your question, I don't believe we are ready to confront what may be Putin's next adventure if he decides to send troops into one of the Baltic states, for example, or into an Eastern European country that's a member of NATO. If that happened, we'd have to defend those countries as part of our treaty obligation. And to do so, we need heavy military power. We've cut our army from by about 10,000 troops just last year, down to about 72,500, which is extremely small and the lowest it's been probably since Tudor days. And at the same time, we've cut our tanks down to about 148. When you think about the fact that Putin had 1,200 tanks on Poland's borders until recently, and now some of them are inside Ukraine, I think that says a great deal about the comparative strength of our armed forces. Now, we would not expect to fight without allies, but nevertheless, we need to pack a bigger punch than we're packing at the moment.
What about the Navy and the Air Force? Don't we have, I thought we had a really good sort of the RAF and stuff like that. Is that not quite well supported? I thought we had a lot of that sort of equipment.
We have a strong Navy and strong Air Force, and they haven't been as badly hit as the Army was hit in this defence cut. But of course, progressively over the years, they've had the number of aeroplanes and combat ships reduced. That I don't think is quite so much as of a problem when looking at this situation as our lack of armoured forces that we can field onto the battlefield in the event of a land operation. I think that's where the major threat lies at the moment. I don't think that that Putin will be in a position to take on our Navy or our Air Force. But he certainly, I think, if he was confronted by an army that lacks tanks and lacks armoured infantry carriers, which are needed to fight alongside the tanks, I think it would be very difficult to resist. And what we can't just resist, we have to also win. And that means outmatching him in technology as well as hard combat power.
And who have we got to support us? So there we are saying we'll support Ukraine and, you know, if anything happens. But who would support the United Kingdom if, say, he decides to launch some sort of attack on us? Because maybe we've missed where his intentions lie.
Well, I think we would be fighting alongside almost certainly the United States of America. It would be Britain and America that would bear the brunt of the fighting, even though other allies in NATO, including France and Italy, have bigger armies. And Germany has an army that's been neglected over the years. I'm happy to see today the German president saying that, the German chancellor rather, saying that he's going to significantly up his defence expenditure. But that's a long-term project. You don't just create a new army or a bigger army overnight. So I think we'd be fighting with the Americans. I hope that the French, the Italians, the Germans and other NATO allies would join in as well as perhaps Canada and other countries that have traditionally fought for freedom in Europe.
Very sort of old school style of warfare. I mean, because I would have thought that we would make more use of sort of online technology and infiltrating systems via, you know, cyber systems and things like that. Why have we not sort of tried to infiltrate? I mean, even if you were sending messages to nuclear warheads or things like that, can we not hack things and try and get into the software of a lot of the machinery?
Yeah, and we are one of the most powerful cyber countries in the world, both in terms of defensive and offensive capability. And that's critically important. But as you can see in Ukraine, where's the cyber? Cyber is probably being used. It has been used. But that's not where the battle is being fought. The battle is being fought between forces on the ground and forces in the air above all. So, yeah, you need all that capability. But we're not in the era of computer games when we're talking about this kind of conflict. Of course, it plays its part. But you've got to have heavy armour, anti-tank missiles, infantry soldiers, anti-aircraft missiles and combat planes to defeat an enemy like this.
Putin has put nuclear deterrent forces on high alert. What does that mean?
I think it means he's even more irresponsible than we thought he was. Perhaps it signals his concerns that he hasn't expressed so much about the latest reactions from Europe. He says he's sort of, I think people have suggested it's in response to comments made by Western European leaders about Russia. I don't think it's a realistic prospect that Putin's going to deploy nuclear weapons against comments. But it does show, I think it shows that he's probably rattled by Western European actions as well as comments. I don't believe, I mean, and I hope I'm not wrong in this, I don't believe that it's very likely that he would unleash nuclear missiles in this kind of situation. He could do in other situations.
I don't know. I don't know. I think I think he would do anything looking at the way he's behaving to his own people. Do you support calls for foreign freedom fighters to go into Ukraine to help at all?
Yeah, I think if British people, for example, who wanted to go and fight in Ukraine, we should be fully behind them in doing so. Do everything we can to help them. That, you know, it's a life and death struggle in Ukraine now. They're facing overwhelming odds, despite the commentary we've been hearing about how Ukrainian forces have been holding up the Russians. I think that has happened to an extent, but Putin has overwhelming force, and it's hard to see how they won't eventually overcome. And therefore, yeah, I think anything that we can do to help, we should do, and that would include sending as much finance to Ukraine as we can to help keep them fighting, as many lethal weapons as we can get into the country at this stage, and providing intelligence and, indeed, as we talked about earlier on, cyber support, including offensive cyber capability against the Russian army.
Well, very briefly, because we're heading towards the news now, why doesn't the rest of the world just get in this thing together and maybe attack Russia?
I think there's no political will to do that. And NATO leaders are not, you know, while they're not happy to see Ukraine getting hammered, which is happening, they're also not happy to carry out some kind of action which will result in the spread of the conflict out of Ukraine across the whole of Europe, which is understandable. I think the best thing we could have done really to prevent this happening would have been to deploy NATO forces into Ukraine before this war started. That might have deterred Putin.
I think that ship has sailed. Thank you very much, Colonel. It's very good to talk to you. That's Colonel Richard Kemp. He's a former British Army commander and former chairman of Cobra. Let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Ethan says our troops are poorly equipped. So much money was wasted on new carriers, and I don't think that we need them. Tom says we're definitely not ready for war. Years of cuts have made our military a shadow of what it used to be. Lee says, underestimate the British Armed Forces at your peril. They are the best in the world. Well, that's a very positive note there. And they are. Our armed forces are good, but I don't know whether they're equipped well enough to go into conflict. What are your thoughts, though? If you just joined me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Still to come, we'll continue the Great British Debate. In this hour, I'm asking, are British Armed Forces ready for war? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, broadcaster Danny Kelly and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Amankona. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
It's 4:33. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Talks between Ukraine and Russia are taking place on the border between Belarus and Ukraine. President Zelensky's office confirmed earlier that both delegations are meeting without preconditions. Ukraine's foreign minister says Belarus has given assurances that it won't get involved in the war during the negotiations. President Putin's order to put Russia's nuclear deterrent forces on high alert has been described as dangerous rhetoric and irresponsible behaviour by NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg. The White House says it is part of Moscow's pattern of manufacturing threats. Kharkiv's governor says Ukraine is still in full control of its second-largest city after Russian forces entered early this morning. Intensive rocket artillery exchanges overnight had been followed by heavy fighting. Meanwhile, President Zelenskyy says his forces have held off Russian troops advancing on the capital. The mayor of Kiev also confirmed there are no Russian troops in his city. Vitaly Klitschko says 31 people have died in the capital since the attack started, including 9 civilians, and 106 people have been injured. 368,000 Ukrainians have already fled for Poland, Moldova and other neighbouring countries. The United Nations warns that number could grow to 4 million if fighting escalates further. Prime Minister Boris Johnson confirmed that the UK will take refugees fleeing the war. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Nana Akua will be back in a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
So welcome back. It's just coming up to 38 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Let's get back into our Great British debate this hour. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has raised concerns about military preparedness here in the UK and whether cuts to defensive spending have left us vulnerable. So I'm asking, are British armed forces ready for war? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by Albi Amankona and Danny Kelly. So let me see. Danny, do you think we're ready for war?
Listening to Colonel Richard Kemp, it was stark to hear him say that the British military have 140-odd tanks. As I understand, the Ukraine army have destroyed around about 120 Russian tanks, which would leave us with 20-odd tanks. That just goes to show how disproportionately underwhelming our military presence on a geopolitical scale is. 72,000 full-time squaddies. I'm not sure how many territorial army we have. So to answer your question, if in isolation the British army is not ready for war, the US army, one would hope, as far as NATO is concerned, would be ready for war.
Do you think? I think they left all their stuff in Afghanistan, didn't they? All their Black Hawks and things.
You see, Putin's Putin's not soft. He may be a maniac, but he's a genius as well. And I worry that he is going to maybe just prod gently to the Eastern European countries like Poland. Maybe there'll be like a false flag operation or something.
That was my view, because I looked at that and thought, and I mean, obviously, I don't want to, it's not conspiracy theory, this is just my view. I've not read anything that says, oh, this is happening. I just thought, well, looking at it, and it's very difficult to think like somebody like Putin. I mean, I was talking about my sister. There's some people who do things you didn't really think they were going to do because you thought that's not what you would do. But they don't think like that. I'll give you an example. My little sister, what she would do is instead of, I would do something she didn't like, and what she would do was then cut the corner of my pencil case, so all my pens would come sliding out. I never thought of that, you know what I mean? And when I say that, I say it in relation to people like Putin who have they'll do these things that you wouldn't even consider. I mean, nobody thought that he would go in and behave like that. And now he's talking about nuclear weapons, and if he's talking about that, then which countries can he reach?
Yes, I think it's a very important point to raise this idea that we never know what Putin is going to do, and therefore it's hard to predict what's going to come next. And I think on the specific point about whether or not the British Army is ready for war, I'll come back to my earlier point about my opinion that Europe has become complacent with our way of life And I think that's been reflected with military spending, not just here in the UK, but also in Germany, for example. And I was really pleased, actually, to see the German Chancellor today commit to spending 2% of their GDP on defence by, I think it was 2024.
But that's NATO. They should have done that anyway.
They should have been doing it all the way through, and actually just 1/3 of NATO countries actually meet that 2% commitment.
And that President Trump pointed that out.
President Trump pointed that out, and that was one of the things which I really respected him for. But on the specific point about the UK Army, obviously we're not in a good position where the whole UK Army could fit into Wembley Stadium with some extra space as well. And whilst we do have quite a powerful Air Force and Navy, we do absolutely need to be investing into foot soldiers as well.
Do you think our other problem is that we talk too much? So if you go, we have no idea of the capability of China because they don't say anything and word does not get out. In fact, nothing gets out of there. The same with Russia. We don't know the full capability of their army because, well, they probably kept it pretty quiet. Whereas here we all know that there's how many tanks and there's this and there's that. Do you think that we talk too much as well? So we kind of give away any military secrets that we have?
No, I don't think we could accuse the military of giving away our
but
secrets.
us as well in terms of media and everything else like that. Do you think we talk too much about it?
Earlier on, Nana, you were talking about the merits of a free society, and part of that is transparency.
Well, that's the thing.
So we can't be saying, on the one hand, saying we love that we live in a free and democratic society, and then saying we should be less transparent. We need to have a military to defend freedom and transparency and democracy, but I don't think we should be going away from our values in order to conquer.
But do you not think that that's a level of, whilst it's a power to speak out and be able to be transparent, there's a weakness there that then you give those who don't think in the same way as you a level of ammunition that could be quite damaging?
I worry, just to go back to Putin for a second, I worry that in a bizarre, maniacal way, he will see us as being complicit in the fight, in a military fight, in the sense that we've supplied all of these incredibly successful anti-tank Javelin missiles, which are holding them back. I think you said earlier on that we're going to see tanks, or we're seeing tanks rolling through a European capital. They're not there yet in Kiev, but potentially. I think he may say at some point, unless you stop supplying the Ukrainian army, I see you as being part of this and complicit.
Well, I think that's what he's saying anyway, but we are complicit in any case because we're paying him, we're supporting him, we're buying his gas. Yeah. Across the world, we're paying for him to do this. So whilst we try and help in one end, the real way we could help, and they'll come back to the whole SWIFT thing, is stop buying their energy. If we stop today, then that's what's funding all of this in any case.
And that's why Germany's so compromised. 40% of their fuel, their gas comes from Russia. Putin knows this. Putin has played a blinder. He is like a James Bond evil genius. He knows this. And over recent years, Donald Trump, right, I like Donald Trump. I don't know how you feel about Donald Trump, and I know you're pro-Trump. But when he was in office, he gave a rollicking to European leaders who are part of NATO to say, why are you being compromised with Russian gas? It's almost like he was prophetic. He could see something like this coming.
I don't think he's that prophetic. Even I could see it. I've been saying, why would you sell your water off to foreign countries and other people? Why would you sell all your resources that are vital for life? Why would you do that? It doesn't make sense anyway.
Just to come back very quickly on this point about Putin being a genius, I don't actually think Putin is a genius, to be honest. A lot of defence analysts are saying that actually the Russian army doesn't have the capacity to hold Ukraine for a very long time, even if it does manage to take Kiev. You know, Ukraine is a country of 45 million people. They've been showing a lot of resistance. And I think to call Putin a genius is something which Trump said. He's not a genius. There's been a lot of resistance, even in Russia. Protests, 1,000 people arrested
that hasn't
in
stopped
Russia.
Him, though.
It's not stopped him yet. The war's been going on since last week. Let's see what happens in the future. But I just want to really come back at this idea that Putin is some kind of evil genius who knows exactly how to overthrow the West. And let's see what we can do and have some belief in the systems that we have in place to tackle these problems.
Oh, but he's rolling tanks into the Ukraine. Militarily, he knows NATO's weaknesses. OK, genius seems a complimentary description, but he's highly intelligent when it comes to what he's trying to achieve.
But it's not going to plan. We're hearing lots of defence analysts coming out saying that Putin's invasion in the Ukraine hasn't gone to plan. And actually, that's one of the reasons why people think that he's been pushing so hard for talks between Russia and Ukraine, which are now happening on the Belarusian border, because actually the military plan isn't going as well as he thought it was going to go. So let's see what
Well, you
comes
don't
of
know
these
that.
talks.
You're just listening to people on the internet.
Who are you listening to?
Well, I'm just looking with my eyes at Russian tanks rolling into Ukraine.
But what are you looking at?
I'm looking at a military strike.
Where are you looking at these Russian tanks? Is that on the
BBC News, GB News.
The same thing, isn't it? You're looking
No,
at news as well. So
how
that's
do
what
you
he's
say
doing.
that commentators are saying it's not going to plan?
No, well,
how does anyone know what his plan is? How do they know what's going through his mind?
He wouldn't have planned it so that he would have planned it probably to get in a bit more swift and a bit more easily. This isn't as easy.
You don't know that.
Well, you can see. Well, I suspect that if you
it's a suspicion.
Well, but we are entitled to suspect. And
I know, but I think listening to someone opine about whether it's going well isn't justification to say that it's not intelligent.
Well, let's put it this way: none of it's going well. It shouldn't be happening.
Of course not. I agree.
So if we look at it in that respect, it shouldn't be happening. But as ever, this show is nothing without you and your views. So let's welcome one of our great British voices. This is your opportunity to be on the show and tell us what you really think about the topics that we're discussing. Graham Waugh is from Luton. Graham, thank you for joining us. We're talking about the preparedness of the British Army. What's your view?
Well, I think the British Army, they've got a lot of, they used to be one of the best in the world, but nowadays they don't need to be soldiers on the ground. I believe we could do it diplomatically, we could do it by cyber attacks, we could do it, but there's so many other ways than having soldiers' feet on the ground. And why is it that we need to stand alone? If this is a NATO operation, then collectively NATO is strong enough to defeat the Russians, in my estimation. However, I heard on the news the other day that there was a lot of money seized, hundreds of millions of dollars, Russia's money. Oh, use that. If he wants to start a fight, he can pay for it. The lad. So our country is in a huge mess financially. So why should we get any more debt because of it? And do you know what? It's never any of the decision makers that suffer. It's always the man on the street that suffers. And this winds me up.
That's always the way, isn't it? That is always the way,
yeah.
Graham. It's really good to talk to you. Thank you for your views. Of course, the war is devastating. Let's have a quick come back to the panel very briefly on that. What Graham's kind of saying, it's always the man on the street that suffers anyway. But with a view to the army, what do we need to do, the British Army? Do we need to get more people trained? How can we move forward?
It's going to be a long process to get the British Army back up in terms of numbers after the cuts that we've seen, since 2008. So it's not necessarily an easy fix to say, yes, we are going to recruit more soldiers, because that takes time. But at least we have a stronger Navy and a stronger Air Force. But we'll just have to make sure that we're not being complacent in the future, making sure that we're making the army appealing to all people, and increasing the numbers of soldiers that we have.
Another great vox pop from a GB News viewer, a very strong Luton accent I picked up there.
Luton, yeah.
Very strong. And he talks a lot of sense, He says that...
He's got a Scottish...
Yes, I did think it sounded very Scottish.
Yes, it was, yes. Oh, no, you got the irony.
Luton accent.
Yeah, of course, he's a Scottish guy, yeah. I tell you what, this morning, I can't remember, the Defence Secretary,
Ben Wallace,
said if you want to go and fight...
Ben Wallace.
Foreign Secretary, forgive me. Said if you want to go and fight in Ukraine, go and fight in Ukraine. And I can tell you now, I would be too cowardly to do it.
Yeah.
I would be too craven to do that.
Yeah, well, most people would, to be honest, but it's a sense if you had a family and a real love for your country, you would go. And they might send you to fight for the UK in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right.
You'd then have to go. Right, before I see what my panel make of all the major updates in the situation in Ukraine, the EU has announced that it is going to close its airspace to Russia, and RT and the Sputnik to be closed down in Europe. Let's see what my panel make of that very briefly. They're shutting RT and...
I watched 10 minutes of RT this morning just to see how it was being reported from the Russian side of things. And they are saying that the Ukrainians are committing genocide, bombing towns on the border.
Oh, really?
Yeah, honestly, it's just so crazy, this thing. So I'm pleased if I can have an opinion on whether that should be closed down, I'm pleased.
Yeah.
I've never watched RT. My only concern is that in retaliation, they might close down Western media outlets in Russia, and it's those Western media outlets which are reporting on things honestly, and maybe influencing the Russian public. So we just have to be mindful of that.
Well, the Russian public must have the internet, and surely they must be knowing. This is why I'm glad that we have this freedom of speech and the internet, and that actually people like Putin do not control those things, and that is a good thing. So today I'm asking, are Britain's armed forces ready for war? Daryl says, could we fight a conventional war using the Ukrainian invasion as an example? It's a no, and that's because we had seriously reduced our armoured infantry and artillery forces. Steve says you should never underestimate the military of defence. Well, you certainly shouldn't underestimate their spending and what they're spending on. Parley, it says we have a fantastic group of brave and professional men and women. I'm not convinced that the last decade has seen them get what they need to get the job done, though. Timothy says we should collaborate with our European partners to make one combined strong democratic defence force. And right now, there is a poll up as well on Twitter throughout the show asking, are Britain's armed forces ready for war? And currently, only 36% of you say yes, 37% say no. So I don't know where that leaves the rest of you. All right, if you just joined me with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, we'll be getting the full story behind Ukraine's wartime leader in Worldview with Alan Mendoza. But first, it's time for a short break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
So good afternoon. If you just joined me, where have you been? I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. And now it's time for the World View. That's the part of the show where we get the headlines from across the globe. And today, perhaps unsurprisingly, we'll be focusing on the conflict in Ukraine. And there have been some major developments from the EU in the last half hour. And in particular, we're going to take a look at the story behind Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who's been winning widespread praise from his bravery and handling of the crisis. So joining me for Worldview today is Alan Mendoza. He's the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society, a foreign policy and national security think tank. So Alan, thank you very much for joining me, first of all. Now, I mean, you must be extremely busy talking about this, but I just wanted to come back to Volodymyr Zelenskyy. He is a charismatic figure. Tell us a bit about him, because most people may not have even known who he is or ever heard his name.
Yes, we wouldn't expect the President of Ukraine to necessarily be a household name in the UK. Very interesting character, because he is, of course, a non-politician politician. This is someone who had no political background, who came into office having forged a successful first comedy career and then acting career, where he played the president on a show called Servant of the People. So basically, his popularity stems from entertainment, not from politics. He ran on a kind of anti-corruption platform, won 73% of the vote. And everyone said, actually, here's an interesting move for Ukraine. It shows its maturity, in a sense, of democracy. It wasn't hidebound by the usual politicians. It was prepared to look outside the system.
It was a bit like George Bush, wasn't he? He was an actor first. Or Ronald Reagan. It was Reagan. Reagan was the actor. So this situation in Ukraine, OK, it's unfolding. Where are we now? We've heard the report that Russia is getting themselves ready in terms of nuclear activity, and that's concerning.
Well, yes, it's not, of course, going to make it more likely they're going to use nuclear weapons, but here's just another muscle flex by Putin. What he's trying to do is continuously flex his muscles in order to say, stay away from this conflict, don't do any more against me, I might be mad enough to launch a nuclear strike. I mean, that's not where we're heading right now, but it's another ratcheting of the pressure on his side of the discussion.
Now, there's also talk of them talking to the Ukrainian president. He's going to talk to Belarus.
Well, he's going to go to the border.
Is he actually going to go? He himself is going to go.
Unclear.
That would make him very vulnerable. And Belarus have been helping, in a sense, Russia. So that doesn't sound like a good idea.
Well, it's unclear as to who will be in the Ukrainian delegation just yet. What they've agreed to at the moment is talks on that border. I mean, yes, of course, you're going to put yourself in quite an exposed position if you go there. At the same time, the fact that these are, kind of bilateral talks, anchored allegedly by a third nation, even one that is biased in a certain way, it would be a particularly low move to try and attack the negotiators in this moment when you claim to be wanting peace. I mean, don't forget Putin's lied all the way along and said, I want peace. He's claiming again, well, this is about me wanting to negotiate and talk about this. I would be surprised if it was the president going, because he'd want to negotiate with Putin directly. You wouldn't do that unless away. But we'll see, I think, what the outline of those talks will be.
It sounds like a setup to me. It doesn't sound like a good plan at all. And in terms of the Ukrainian people then and their resistance, we're hearing that they are resisting and they're putting up a good fight and all this sort of thing. Do you have any more information on anything new that's developed there?
Well, I think the key thing is that the Ukrainians remain in control of their major cities. So despite an offensive in Kharkiv, for example, the second largest city, where the Russians clearly attempted a rather major move to try and take it, the Ukrainian Defence Forces repulsed that and they remain in control of the city. So on day 4 of the conflict, Putin has yet to make significant inroads on any of his major targets in terms of the cities he needs to take if he really wants to bring Ukraine to submission. And that, of course, is actually very promising because it suggests two things. Firstly, the Ukrainian resistance is real, determined and effective. And secondly, that the Russian military machine is not the kind of grade A Rolls-Royce that Putin might have thought it would be, because they have clearly failed to achieve those objectives they would have wanted to take in those first 4 days.
And what about, because when I've asked people, what would they do, they said, well, there should be a no-fly zone and all that kind of thing above Ukraine, which would stop Russians from attacking from the air, which would be a very serious thing for Ukraine, because that's really the only real major advantage they have. Why are we not going to do anything like that?
Well, for us to impose a no-fly zone over the entirety of Ukraine will bring us straight into conflict with Russia. There'd be no doubt about it. Now, again, the Russians have no right to be in Ukraine, but at the same time, if we were to insert our planes into that theatre of operations, the likelihood of a cataclysmic even accident where one side shoots down the other ratchets straight up. Now, nobody wants to be at this moment in time eyeball to eyeball with Putin when he's just raised his nuclear temperature in that way. However, that doesn't mean we shouldn't impose a no-fly zone on the western part of the country, for example. What we should do, in my view, is put our troops and our planes in the western part where there is no fighting at the moment, secure that area for refugees first, is a safe area, which has a long history in international conflict. That would, of course, enable refugees to head there rather than having to leave the country. But crucially, it would also secure that territory as an area of free Ukraine that would be unattackable by Putin. And it wouldn't be directly interfering in the conflict.
Why would that not be interfering? That would be boots on the ground
in Western Ukraine. But in Western Ukraine, introduced
is that
by
different for the rest of Ukraine? I mean, Ukraine is one unit, isn't it?
It is one unit, but you've got to think about where the fighting actually is. Putin's planes are coming over the east, the north and the south at the moment. If you create a line in the west where you bring your forces in, at the behest, of course, at the democratically elected Ukrainian government, he can't really... he'll complain, but he can't really do that much about it. What we want to do is up the ante without going eyeball to eyeball at this stage.
I suspect he's trying to push the ante up so that we do eventually go eyeball to eyeball, because I think it looks to me like he wants conflict.
Well, if he does do that, let's be in the best position possible to be eyeball to eyeball with him, and that would involve us having made some proactive moves ourselves rather than allowing him the luxury of always dictating the pace, which is what he's done so far.
Well, we have allowed him the luxury to do that as well, in the belief that he won't do anything really bad, and he's doing bad things. Really good to talk to you. Really good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining me and answering all those questions. I know a lot of people will be wanting to ask you questions as well. That's Alan Mendoza. He's the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. You're watching me, Nana Akua. This is GB News. More in the next hour. So it's just gone 5 o'clock here on GB News. For the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 5. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. And in breaking news, the EU has announced that it's closing its airspace to all Russian planes. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says that includes private jets owned by oligarchs. The European Union is also considering a proposal to use common funds to finance weapons, fuel and medical supplies for Ukraine. Ms von der Leyen says she's proud of the warm welcome Europeans have given Ukrainians who fled.
President Zelenskyy's leadership and his bravery and the resilience of the Ukrainian people are outstanding and impressive. They are an inspiration for all of us. We welcome with open arms those Ukrainians who have to flee from Putin's bombs.
Well, 368,000 Ukrainians have already fled for Poland, Moldova and other neighbouring countries. The United Nations is warning that number could grow to 4 million if fighting escalates. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has confirmed that the UK will take refugees fleeing the war. Ukraine's president says he needs to use every opportunity to secure peace as his country is due to meet with Russia for peace talks. President Zelenskyy says he does not really believe in the outcome of the talks, but he wants to take every chance to stop the war. His office confirmed earlier that the talks are taking place on the border between Belarus and Ukraine, and that both delegations are meeting without preconditions. Ukraine's foreign minister says Belarus has given assurances that it won't get involved in the war during the negotiations. President Putin's order to put nuclear deterrent forces on high alert is dangerous rhetoric and irresponsible behaviour. That's according to NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg. The White House says it's part of Moscow's pattern of manufacturing threats. Chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, says Russia's timetable is not working and Putin is trying to intimidate the West.
Perhaps in a sense of almost panic by Putin in suggesting it's now firstly time for talks. That seems a bit premature given that it's only day 4. And now almost referencing the nuclear deterrent as if to somehow get us to become rattled, to intimidate us and so forth. We need to stand firm. We need to hold our ground.
Tobias Ellwood. Kharkiv's governor says Ukraine is still in full control of its second largest city after Russian forces entered early this morning. Intensive rocket artillery exchanges overnight have been followed by heavy fighting in the area. The Ukrainian president said the night had been brutal with shelling of civilian buildings. He also announced that he's setting up a foreign legion to bring in volunteers from abroad.
They are fighting against everyone. They are fighting against all living beings, against kindergartens, residential buildings, against ambulances. They use rocket artillery, missiles in city districts where there are not, and never were, any military facilities.
Well, President Zelenskyy also says Ukrainian forces have held off Russian troops advancing on the capital. That, as the mayor of Kiev confirmed there are no Russian troops in his city. Vitaly Klitschko said that in total 31 people have died in the capital since the attack started, including 9 civilians, and 106 people have been injured. The Deputy Defence Minister for Ukraine says Russia has lost around 4,300 men so far in the invasion, as well as 146 tanks and 26 helicopters. Irina Desipio is the president of the Revived Soldiers of Ukraine, a US charity organising aid. She told GB News that her parents have fled Ukraine to Poland and her brother is fighting to defend his country. She says Ukrainians are fighting with their bare hands and the invasion will incur big Russian losses.
Our privilege is that we know territory. We own our land. We know every corner. We know every house. So for Russians, it's much harder to come in and fight. That's why they're losing a lot of people. I can't believe Putin is sending his own people to die, because they will die.
Irina Desipio. Rail firms are ramping up services that had been cancelled due to COVID. Avanti West Coast and East Midlands Railway are bringing back lines cut in December and January. For those coming to London, North Wales and Chester will get a second daily service to and from the capital, and trains from Manchester and Birmingham to Euston will be doubled from Monday. OK, this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Nana Akua.
Good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Amankona, and broadcaster Danny Kelly. Still to come each Sunday at 5 o'clock, I'll be joined by a celebrity, a former MP, or someone who's had an extremely interesting career to take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And today, if we can get them, we're going to be speaking to the former British Ambassador Charles Crawford, who served in places like Sarajevo, Belgrade and Warsaw. He's now a negotiation expert and will give us his take on the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. And our Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking whether the UK should be more self-sufficient with energy. It's as a group of MPs claim the decision not to proceed with fracking in the UK was instigated on a false pretext. We'll also be hearing from your views. Get in touch. GB Voices is our lovely little segment where you tell us your thoughts on the things that we're discussing. You can also email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. So, as heavy fighting continues across Ukraine, it seems that hopes of a diplomatic solution will be the crisis, will see the solution to the crisis. But could negotiation and discussion have averted war? And what does it take to manage relations with another country? One man who knows all about that is Charles Crawford, who served as the British ambassador to a number of Eastern European nations. Notably, he was ambassador to Warsaw in Poland, which is now on the front line of the unfolding crisis as those seeking refuge flee Ukraine. So I'm pleased to say that Charles joins me now. Charles, thank you very much for joining me. Let's start with this. Given your experience, I mean, you've been a diplomat. Do you think that the invasion of Ukraine could have been avoided?
No, because President Putin wanted to invade Ukraine. He's basically... I mean, it's a bit hard to tell exactly what he wants, but I think one of the things he wants is to try to reconstitute the Soviet Union in sort of 2.0, USSR 2.0. He's already taken Crimea, and this is basically an exercise to deal with the most European part of the former Soviet Union, which is not yet in the EU, namely Ukraine, to try and get that back into Russia's power. And so he's already stolen Crimea. He's trying to steal eastern parts of Ukraine, and he wants to try and bring the whole of Ukraine under his control. And there's nothing to negotiate if someone is prepared to use a military invasion for something as sort of bizarre as that.
I mean, I know that you, in 1991, worked in the SCO department dealing with the Soviet Union as the communist rule collapsed. Talk to me about what it was like dealing with the Soviet Union at the time.
Well, that was, you've got to remember the Cold War. You know, the Soviet Union was like the weather. It was always with us. You know, communism was something we had to put up with because it had just always been there. No one really could remember a time no one working there in the Foreign Office could remember a time before communism, before the First World War, really. So for it to end in that sort of drastic way, Soviet rule was extraordinary. I didn't predict it. No one predicted it. And no one predicted the speed with which it would collapse. It was a completely rotten, hollow system, even though it looked very scary and big and, difficult. But it just collapsed. And so we had a busy time, putting it mildly. This is before email and before almost before fax machines, I think, or just after fax machines. It was very difficult to, to find out what was happening. And on the day the actual coup against Gorbachev took place, we had a meeting in the Foreign Secretary's office. I was acting head of the department dealing with this crisis, and we just sat and watched CNN because that seemed to be the best way to find out what was happening. And then 2 or 3 days later, it was all over, and we had to start recognizing all these new countries, including Ukraine. We had to deal with the fact that Soviet nuclear weapons were spread across 4 different republics, and we had to try and think of a way to get them back into Russian hands, because Russia was the most serious of the former republics, and at the time the most Western. So that seemed to make sense.
I can remember, because I actually visited the Soviet Union when it was the USSR, and I can remember all the queues. You had to queue for everything. You go for a queue there, then a queue there. I mean, that would never carry on, not in this country. We hate queuing, don't we? Do you think that Putin is actually thinking rationally at the moment? And what do you think his true motivations are for this whole invasion?
Well, that's what I think is, I think you can have very insane sort of objectives, but then pursue them rationally, if you see what I mean. You can pursue them methodically. And so I think he's been in power a very long time now, over 20 years. And I think most leaders who stay in power for more than about 8 years start to go a bit strange, in my own experience. So I think he's someone who's wrapped up in the mythology of Russian greatness and Russian, almost mysticism in a certain way. And I think the fact that he's physically invaded Ukraine in the way he has done shows that he's losing the plot. I mean, this can't possibly end well. What does he think he's really trying to do? Ukraine's a big country. It's well over 30 million people. I think he's probably underestimated, because I think ethnic Russians tend to underestimate the strength with which Ukrainians, not Russian-speaking Ukrainians, but if you like, ethnic Ukrainians, really have a sense that this is their time. They've been oppressed for one reason or the other for centuries, and now they've got their own country. They're sort of independent of Moscow. They're quite happy with that. And to try and threaten that in this absurd way and invade and shoot people, it doesn't really add up. And I think a lot of people in Russia will be very unhappy with this, because they see Ukrainians as their sort of cousins or brothers even. I mean, imagine England invading Scotland with tanks and blowing up Edinburgh because we were objecting to Scottish independence. It's unthinkable. And it was really unthinkable for most of this last 20 years, and now it's happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, we wouldn't win that one, but I just don't see. I hear your thoughts there. There's no way that would be acceptable, especially me, who is English, although I was born in Newcastle. If I was to see that, I wouldn't allow that. I'd be absolutely furious. So I'm wondering, do you think the message is getting across to the Russians as to what is actually happening? Because we hear reports of the sort of manipulation of a lot of the Russian media. Do you think people are being convinced by what they're hearing?
Well, you've got to remember that Russia's a big place. It's hard. If I asked you how many time zones Russia has, I'd be very impressed if you knew the answer. But the answer is 11. And when you get to Vladivostok, right on that edge, there's 3 more time zones. Basically, Russia stretches from Finland to Alaska, all around the top of the planet. So, trying to work out what the Russians think when they're 10 time zones away from Moscow is a difficult issue. But basically, no, because I think Putin has. There's tremendous propaganda in Russia, tremendous manipulation of the news, tremendous cynical and clever and very modern ways of doing that. Now, social media and those sort of things help. And word will be getting around, but it doesn't really matter what the Russians think. Russians, right down history, have never really risen up against a leader except in Moscow. And in Moscow, it's very tightly controlled. You have to be very brave to go and demonstrate against Putin, because you'll probably get beaten up, so it's not straightforward.
Very brave, those who've gone, and thousands have been arrested already in the protests, which is They're very brave to even speak up against him, which is the frightening thing when you're within a totalitarian regime. I want to ask you about the refugees situation in terms of the influx into Poland. How much pressure do you think that will have on the Polish people there? Because I know you've worked within that sphere as well.
Well, it's a little bit like all these things, that the issues go back into history. Ukraine and Poland actually have had a rather sort of difficult time because Poland was the imperial power for a long time. Ukrainians were under Warsaw rule, and then there were some messy things that happened after the First World War and the Polish attitude to Ukraine then, which didn't go down well with ethnic Ukrainians. But now Poland has been a real champion of Ukraine, as in a sense, a way of trying to make that part of the former Soviet Union more European. So the current Polish government and, frankly, the Polish people as a whole will be falling over themselves to do whatever they can to help. And if that means taking refugees, they'll take them. Actually, we tend not to know this in our part of Europe, but Ukraine has taken in a lot of migrants from, as I say, Ukraine. Poland has taken in a lot of migrants from Ukraine. Anyway, if you go into a Polish shop now in Warsaw, you're quite likely to hear Ukrainian being spoken the way you might hear Polish being spoken in a shop in London. So there's actually quite a very good now relationship between Poland and Ukraine, and this crisis will improve it if you can use such an expression. Poles will be generous in this situation for sure.
Very briefly, as a diplomat, what will the diplomats be doing then between the Russian diplomats and Ukrainian diplomats? Will they be actually speaking at all?
Well, they may be speaking, but it won't be the diplomats. It'll be the intelligence agencies, where you have ways of getting messages through to people which show that they're serious messages. The moment for diplomacy between those two countries is long gone. There's nothing to talk about. If you're punching me in the face, I don't need a diplomat to tell me what to think about that. So I think there will be informal contacts, of course, because there always are, even in these war situations. But I think the problem for Ukraine, and maybe indeed for Putin, is what is it you want to talk about? Is if I invade your garden and take over half your garden, we can call for a peaceful settlement. But if the peaceful settlement means that you lose half your garden, that's not a very good deal for you. So in the end, in a diplomatic negotiation, you only really, in a negotiation, if there's peace talks in Geneva or wherever they end up being, you only get in the peace talks, the maximum you get is what you have on the ground. You're never going to do better in a negotiation than what you have on the ground. So therefore, the Russians are trying to create facts on the ground. This bit of Ukraine's been carved off. This bit's been recognized. This bit now gets special autonomy, so that when there is talks, the talks sort of freeze the status quo. So in a sense, the real negotiation here is the war. The question is, what can the Russians do to break the Ukrainians' will? That's what this negotiation is all about. And talks are talks, but the war is the negotiation. And the Ukrainians are doing a very good job at fighting back and making the Russians pay a very high price for this.
It's frightening, isn't it? I sincerely hope that it all stops and that I don't really know what the solution could be for this one. If you could say one thing that you think might be a way forward, what would you say that would be?
Wow. I'm a bit baffled by this myself, because it's outside all categories of analysis we've had for the last 50 years. I was in Budapest in Hungary the other day, and I met someone who'd met an Estonian diplomat who had met one of Putin's core, hardcore ideologues. And this Estonian diplomat said to this man, where does this end? And this Putin fellow said, where you stop us. So the question is, where do we stop them? And even if there's talks now and peace, that doesn't mean he's stopped. It means he's paused, and he'll maybe wait for a while and keep going. So, if there's a positive way forward, I think we have to carry on being very tough, and we have to find ways in which, whatever it takes really, to help the Ukrainian people. We're not prepared to send in our own soldiers. That would be a massive escalation. But there may be lots of other informal ways we can send in weapons support, money, intelligence support, to really raise the cost on the ground for Putin, so that when there are finally talks, some settlement emerges which keeps Ukraine in business in some way.
Well, Charles, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you for your thoughts. That's Charles Crawford. He's the former British ambassador to Sarajevo, Belgrade and Warsaw, and a negotiation specialist. Thank you so much. Coming up, it's the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, should the UK be more self-sufficient with energy? A group of Conservative MPs have said that fracking in the UK was ended on a false pretext. It's because just tens of buildings were impacted by supposed earthquakes caused by shale gas exploration. So with the Ukraine crisis exposing our dependence on Russian gas and oil, I'm asking if we should be more self-sufficient with our energy supply. First, let's get some weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, the UK is looking fine and sunny with a little cloud and rain possible in the west. Let's take a look at the details. Turning cloudier in the southwest this evening. The cloud could be thick enough to bring the odd spot of rain for a time. It'll be breezy, especially along southern coast. The southeast of England will end the day with continued dry and sunny conditions for all. There'll be a brisk southerly breeze. Increasing amounts of patchy clouds will continue to spread eastwards across southern and western Wales this evening. It'll turn increasingly breezy here too. In contrast, it'll be a fine end to Sunday across all parts of the Midlands. There'll be plenty of sunshine with a rather brisky southerly breeze, feeling quite spring-like. The northeast of England will also end the day dry with plenty of sunshine. There'll be a brisk southerly wind, especially along the coast, and temperatures will dip quickly after sunset. There'll be a west-east split across Scotland this evening with dry and sunny weather for eastern areas and cloudier conditions in the west with a little rain possible. Patchy cloud and sunny spells across Northern Ireland, but thicker cloud and rain also approaching from the west throughout the evening. The winds will increase too. Cloud, rain and stronger winds will edge in from the west overnight, the rain turning heavy at times over western hills. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
So if you just tuned in, where have you been? It's 24 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. And it's time for our Great British Debate. And this hour, I'm asking, should the UK be more self-sufficient in energy? A group of Conservative MPs has said that fracking in the UK was ended because of flawed evidence. It's because a low number of buildings were impacted by tremors caused by shale gas exploration. So with the Ukraine crisis exposing the dependence of European countries on Russian gas and oil, I'm asking, if we should be more self-sufficient with our energy supply. Let's see what my panel make of that. Let's see. What do you think? Do you think we are too dependent on things outside our control, Albie?
I'm absolutely in favour of energy independence, and I think that can happen through a number of ways. It could be through fracking, rather. It could be through exploration at the Cambo oil field just off the coast of Shetland, which has also been put on pause. But it also could mean, you know, a bigger focus on renewables and also nuclear. I think we need a mixed energy policy going forward. Fracking is very unpopular in the communities that it affects. And there's something that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable about Southern Tory MPs where fracking, it's not going to affect their constituents, basically saying we want to frack up in the north. That just makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. But in principle, I'm not opposed to fracking. I just think we need to be listening to the people who it's going to affect.
And quickly, Danny, from you.
Well, they're remote areas in the northwest or the northeast. So London MPs, you don't have anywhere where you could start fracking. Like you, I think we should be more self-sufficient. I really do. In America, where they have thousands, tens of thousands of fracking wells, about 50 or 60% of all of their gas and oil is generated from those wells. And look at the price of a gallon of petrol in America.
Yeah, well, yeah, don't. Otherwise your eyes will fall out. Well, today, joining me to discuss this is an expert on different energy sources. Angela Knight is the former CEO of Energy UK. Angela, thank you for joining us. Just start by telling us what fracking is and why it was stopped in the first place.
Well, fracking is short for fracturing, and it's a process whereby a shaft is drilled and then some high-pressure water and oil is forced down into the shaft. It goes into the shale fissures on either side, and what comes out then is oil and gas. And we've got some big of these shale fields here in the UK, which can be exploited. The US, as has already been said, has done a lot of fracking. Some of it was good, and a lot of it was done quite badly in the US. And I think that it's like so many of these debates. There's those who say, just go ahead and do it. And there's those who say, never, never should it be done. Actually, the truth lies somewhere in between. And what I think we should do in the UK is actually run a proper test site of fracking. I agree it should be in a remote area. And I totally agree with what's been said, that it doesn't really sound right if you've got Southern MPs saying do it in the north. But unless we actually try, then we will not know how we can do it in an appropriate way, an environmentally friendly way, and by so doing, make ourselves have a good strategic reserve of gas, which is certainly something that this crisis between Ukraine and Russia has flagged up.
How dangerous does it seem, though? Because the last time it was done, I think it was in Yorkshire, and they said that there were some tremors. Why would that have been? Why would have that happened? Because it sounds what you're saying is something high pressure forcing the oil out. Yeah. It doesn't sound like it would be that dangerous for the environment. But why is it? Why? Okay. What's the link between that and earthquakes?
Yes, well, it's that actual pressure forcing process and the way that it pushes into the shale and pulls, and the oil and gas comes out. It's that which has caused and does cause a certain amount of earthquake. Now, of course, when you and I think of earthquakes, or when I think of earthquakes, I think of some of those terrible earthquakes that we've seen, which brings down buildings and so on. Actually, this is far more a low-level tremor, and it was stopped because of the tremor. But there is equally a question as to whether that the amount of tremor that they cause, that fracking can cause. Firstly, if you know, how serious is it? And as I understand it, it's very low level indeed. And secondly, if the activity is taking place in an area which is nowhere near buildings and where people are living and anything like that, then self-evidently, the fact that you've got that tremor really dies away. Where the environmentalists are most concerned about is the contamination of the water that is used to, which you pump down into the shaft and which is used to get into the shale and replace the or force out the oil and gas. And that water is not pure water. And of course, when it comes out, it will be contaminated, just as, we get contaminations in lots of areas. Indeed, we used to get a lot of contaminated water from coal mining. Now, I don't want to compare the two at all, but certainly what I can say is that we have a good record here in the UK of knowing how to deal with contaminated water because it's used in so many of our chemical and other processes. So whilst there are very serious issues, the tremor is one, the environmental potential hazards are another, the way the arguments are run is they've been run emotionally. And this is a scientific and an engineering, and as I say, a energy security issue. And it is from those perspectives that what we should be doing is drilling a pilot, properly controlling it, properly measuring it, and then see what real potential there is for the UK, yes or no.
Now, Angela, you mentioned coal. How realistic would it be to try and reignite some of our coal mines as well?
You can do, but I'm not entirely sure that that is a real proposition. I think we still have some coal-fired power stations working in the UK, and they have been held as a real sort of emergency backup. We always show, when we show coal-fired power stations, open cast mining, which of course doesn't take place much in the UK, and these sort of great big water coolers where the steam comes off the top and people look at that and think it's smoke, and it isn't. I think we need to be clear that producing electricity from coal is not a particularly clean proposition at all, and never has been. At the same time, what we've never done properly as a UK is say, we want to go to a far more renewable form of electricity and energy generally. That means we close down our coal-fired power stations and we build wind. But as the wind doesn't blow all the time, there needs to be a backup. Right now, on a cold day like today, you haven't got much wind, and so you need something that fills the gap, or we don't have power in this country. And that gap at the moment has not been properly filled. Yes, we have gas-fired power stations, and we're seeing all the consequences of not being self-sufficient on gas. We haven't actually started properly to build the small, repeatable nuclear power stations which actually can provide that backup. So in this interregnum period, we need actually more gas, not less, and we've got to start building the backup replacement nuclear power, because that will replace at least some of our gas-fired power stations and make us more energy secure.
Angela, we're running out of time, so literally, if you could squeeze this into about 20 seconds, that would be great. What about North Sea oil?
North Sea oil and gas, I would drill more right now. At the moment, you're able to get more out of existing wells because of the price, and of course, we do get a lot of our gas from Norway, which is also, if you like, almost North Sea. Yes, let's get what we can as close to this country as we possibly can, fill up our reserves, get a strategic reserve in place, rethink energy policy along the lines of what do we do given that there's been a global change, and that global change will continue.
Angela, thank you so much. That's Angela Knight. She's the former CEO of Energy UK. Let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Jamie says, I wonder how many people who think we should be more self-supplied realise the added cost of doing that. I agree, we should, but it's not that simple. Well, that's interesting you say that, but is the cost money or is the cost life? Because from what I'm seeing, I'd rather spend more money and not buy stuff from Vladimir Putin. Alexei says we should start by building storage facilities for gas and oil and maybe consider shale production. Peter says insulate our homes. Yeah, that's a good point, Peter. That's the answer. Most of the money that we spend on heating is basically wasted and it goes to the cold air outside our homes. Well, thank you for that. Keep your thoughts coming. We'll be discussing it more shortly. You're with me, Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, we'll continue the Great British Debate, and I'm asking, should the UK be more self-sufficient with energy? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, Danny Kelly and Albi Amankona. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thanks, Nana. It's 5:34. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The European Union has announced that it's closing its airspace to all Russian planes, including private jets owned by oligarchs. The European Commission is aiming to use €450 million of EU funds to finance arms deliveries to Ukraine. An additional €50 million are meant to be spent on other equipment for Ukraine, such as medical supplies. President Putin's order to put Russia's nuclear deterrent forces on high alert has been described as dangerous rhetoric and irresponsible behaviour by NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg. The White House says it's part of Moscow's pattern of manufacturing threats. Ukraine's president says he needs to use every opportunity to secure peace as his country is due to meet with Russia for talks. President Zelenskyy says he doesn't really believe in the outcome of the talks, but he wants to take every chance to stop the war. Kharkiv's governor says Ukraine is still in full control of its second largest city after Russian forces entered early this morning. Intensive rocket artillery exchanges overnight had been followed by heavy fighting. 368,000 Ukrainians have already fled for Poland, Moldova and other neighbouring countries. The United Nations warns that number could grow to 4 million if fighting escalates further. And here in the UK, thousands of demonstrators are protesting the invasion of Ukraine in London's Trafalgar Square. Many Russians joined the rally, led by Ukrainian community leaders, holding up placards with messages like, "Russians do not want the war." Meanwhile, BP has announced that it's exiting its 19.75% shareholding in Russian oil giant Rosneft, and its chief executive is resigning from Rosneft's board with immediate effect. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now back to Nana Akua.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
39 minutes after 5 o'clock, I'm Nana Akua. You're watching GB News, or you may be listening online or on digital radio. Now, we've got loads to do in the show, so we'd love it if you join us. We're back to our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, should the UK be more self-sufficient with energy? A group of Conservative MPs say that fracking in the UK was ended on a false pretext. It's because only a small number of buildings were impacted by supposed earthquakes caused by shale gas exploration. So, with the Ukraine crisis exposing some countries' dependence on Russian gas and oil, I'm asking if we should turn to things like fracking and coal and gas and oil to be more self-sufficient with our own energy supply. This show, as ever, is nothing without your thoughts, so please keep them coming. But let's have a quick chat with my panel, Danny Kelly and also Albi Amankona. Right, Danny, you talked about how the gas was right underneath our feet, or maybe even your feet.
They could use me as a fracking drill.
Maybe you have another source of gas.
You might get stuck, you might get
you're
stuck
sitting
down
next
the
to the biggest source of gas in the GB newsroom. I'll tell you that right. Why do you think I sit here?
Yeah.
I disagree. I'll go back to your position earlier on and Angela's position that Northerners are going to find it contemptuous that Southern MPs tell them where to frack. Look, I'm a Scouser, and I wouldn't care who told me why my energy was going to be cut by 50%, whether you're a Southern MP. All I'm bothered about is the price of my energy. So I don't think that you and Angela are correct on that. I think there's too much emphasis on people assuming that Northerners hate Southern MPs.
No,
so
I don't think that at all. I mean,
and that's not my experience.
That's not what I mean. My issue is with MPs in certain areas of the country where fracking is never going to happen, basically saying that fracking has got to happen in these other places where it's very unpopular. If we look at where there have been fracking sites, in Lancashire, which is in the north, but also in Sussex, which is in the south, and Alex, actually one of the producers, lives near one of these fracking sites, it's very unpopular with those constituents. So if the government and these fracking companies like Cordrilla want to work with the communities which are going to be affected by fracking to make it more popular in those areas, so there is support for fracking in those areas, then I'd be behind it. As I said, I'm open-minded towards fracking, but we need to take the communities that are going to be affected by fracking with us rather than just imposing something.
Well, we're presuming that everybody in that constituency is anti-fracking.
But that's why fracking got cancelled in Lancashire, was because the constituents weren't happy with it.
Well, it got cancelled because of the earth tremors and there was a lot of pressure put on.
And it was unpopular.
Yes, but I'm not saying it's overwhelmingly unpopular. You seem to think that everybody in the constituency or the overwhelming majority think fracking is a bad thing if it's on their doorstep.
Well, but it was.
But that's why it was stopped.
That's why it was stopped, though, Danny. That's what he's saying.
No, correct. But there wasn't like a referendum on it. It was just some lobby groups putting pressure on the local MP who put pressure, I guess, in Westminster. So we're assuming that it's overwhelmingly unpopular. I would argue that we don't know that. If I was a constituent in Sussex and my gas bill potentially was going to be reduced by 50%, and it was explained to me that the reason that they're drilling in Sussex is because it's going to be rich in shale gas, and they can't do it in the southeast or London area because basically everybody lives on top of each other, I would say, OK, well, I understand that. Because my gas bill is going to be
There's actually not much evidence to say that if we did use fracking, that the gas price would go down, because gas prices are, of course, it's a global gas price. The argument is more about energy independence rather than the price of gas. I believe we should be a more energy-independent country, but we need to take the communities with us who are going to be affected by gas exploration so that we don't cause more divisiveness and resentment in society that we already see.
But there is also, sorry, Danny, but there is also the net zero agenda, which is extremely unpopular. But as Angela correctly pointed out, there is an environmental impact with fracking, which is, as she's talked about, the water that they use to pump down the shaft at high pressure, which then brings up all the shale and everything else. And so that there is that environmental impact as well.
But I would argue that there is evidence that if you're self-sufficient, prices come down, because the evidence is in America, where 50 to 60% of their gas and oil it comes out of the ground through fracking. Now, the price of a gallon of petrol in some states in America is like £2 or something. So that is evidential, I believe, that if you are self-sufficient... For example, look, Germany, they stopped the nuclear energy after Fukushima, OK? And now look at them, 50% of their gas is coming from Russia.
Well, and at least...
And they dictate the prices.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You would dictate the price.
Exactly. So if it's done in the UK, you're in charge of the prices.
That's the thing.
My point.
What do you make of the other sources that we have? So we've got North Sea oil. We've got that we could use. She suggested that we could get on with that quite quickly.
Yes, I think broadly I support a mixed energy policy. And I think when we're talking about fossil fuels, you know, we're talking about fracking being paused. Cambo oil field exploration has also been paused. And I think it's probably better that we talk about these offshore sources of fossil fuels rather than onshore ones, which is going to affect people's homes and make people very upset. I'm not against fossil fuel exploration. I do think in the long term we need to be moving away from it, but there is a stopgap which needs to be filled. And we need to be looking at a mixed energy policy in the future, mostly from renewable and nuclear some fossil fuel for backup.
Do you think it's time we stop the net zero agenda that we're sort of heading towards the speed of knots?
I think that now we understand what net zero means. I think we should almost have a referendum on it as a society. This is what net zero actually looks like. This is the bills that we are having to pay.
But just very
quickly,
quickly,
you want it?
Just very quickly on net zero, one of the things that I actually really like about net zero is, at its core, it is about energy independence. It's about saying that we can generate our own energy using natural resources in Britain, which is why I find the arguments about fracking and the arguments about net zero and energy independence are actually quite similar. It's about generating energy using resources in Britain or within British territories. Surely we should be in favour of that.
Well, it is, but it's also saying that certain elements of the energy that is available to us should be shut down. So we're talking coal, we're talking North Sea oil, in fact, even things like fracking. So whilst they're going for the agenda, they're looking at other ways of taking resources that actually currently exist that we could currently use, because they're going for zero carbon, which I don't know whether it's a realistic goal, especially at this stage. But as ever, this show is nothing without you and your views. So let's welcome our great British voice, and this is your opportunity to be on the show and tell us what you think about what we're discussing. Nigel Alderson is from Blackpool. Nigel, now, what do you think about all of this? What's your view?
Well, I've got mixed feelings, really, about pollution and potential earthquakes. But as we all know, there's large gas prices coming, and most of us won't be able to afford it, myself included. But the reality is, especially with what's happening in Ukraine right now, God bless them, and even them poor, silly young Russian soldiers, we've got to be more self-sufficient and rely on ourselves more. So if fracking is the way forward, get fracking. But look at other things as well, anything to create power, for, heat for the homes and keep your businesses going. And if we can get fracking up here in the north, it's good for us, create jobs, create some wealth, and get on with it, basically. And Boris, I think, needs to go in and tell everybody we're going to get fracking, and also stop building on greenfield land, because we need to feed ourselves. So Boris has got a lot of work to do. Get on with it. That's what I think.
If he wants to level up, that's a good start right there. Well, Nigel, thank you very much for your thoughts. That's Nigel Alderson. He's a painter and decorator in Blackpool. Yeah, he said that, hasn't he? And, this government have been talking about levelling up. There'll be nothing more levelling to the playing field than allowing a lot of the northern communities around this country to start opening up where they can obtain natural energy from this country, because that's, again, where the wealth is. It's clear that we have a very, very sort of affluent land, and we have resources that we are not tapping on because we're going forward with this agenda of net zero, which actually, if we're not careful, could end up as net zero, because if people like Putin are in power and we are paying for them to be in power by buying fuels from them, then there's no end to what he might do. And I mean, nuclear warfare is not something that will be very kind to the environment at all. So we need to stop him, exactly. We need to stop funding him, giving him the option to be able to press the button and behave like that. We're worrying about net zero in how many years' time, when, there's potentially nuclear war on the cards. It's not great.
No, I mean, it's not great, but I'm actually really glad that we heard from Nigel, who was in Blackpool, which is actually one of the areas which was affected by shale gas exploration. He's very much behind it. And that's what we need to be hearing from all people who are going to be affected by shale gas exploration. My opposition is not to shale gas exploration. It's about making it appealing to people who are going to be affected by shale gas exploration.
And that's kind of where Danny was going with it, wasn't it?
And another great opinion piece from one of our listeners, a working-class lad from Blackpool, who, at the end of the day, in summary, he wants to make sure that he can afford to heat his house. And that's important, the here and now problem.
That is the here and now. The here and now is more important than, let's look at 20 years' time, get rid of our diesel engines. I mean, I'm not keen on that. I was looking forward to buy myself a nice new car. I didn't fancy a Scooby-Doo electric Dodgem thing.
You need a new car, hey?
Oh, God. He's a used car salesman.
Can I just correct you? I'm a used car dealer.
That's what you keep saying.
Not a salesman.
What's the difference?
I own the company.
The
difference is I own the company. Right. And someone sells the cars.
All right, but
my wife.
Well, listen, today we're asking, should the UK be more self-sufficient with energy? And lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Pete says, of course, this is a big wake-up call. Build nuclear popular. Start fracking until the green strategy is complete. Tom says, of course not. Everyone seems to forget that people don't want net zero for the sake of it. It's because climate change will destroy our planet. Well, that's if Putin doesn't. Joe says, scrap the green tax and utilise the North Sea. Start fracking. Tabitha says, please don't want frack. People don't want fracking in their backyard. It causes earthquakes and pollutes the water. We should do it next to Vladimir Putin's house. Very good on that. I think that's a good time to end our debate. Thank you very much for that. Well, thank you for your thoughts. It's time now, though, for Supplement Sunday, where my panel share some of the stories that have caught their eye. And today, I'm with broadcaster Danny Kelly and also co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Amankona. OK, so first, Albi, you're first to go on. What have you got? It's about universities.
Yes, absolutely. It was a brilliant piece by one of my favourite journalists, Charlotte Ivers from The Times. And she is basically talking about how there are changes in the thresholds for student loan repayments and about how it's going to actually hurt middle earners the most. So basically, the threshold for student loan repayments is coming down from about £27,900 to £25,000. So people on lower incomes will start having to pay them back. The period that you pay off your student loan has also been extended from 30 years to 40 years. And this policy, of course, is not going to be very popular with students and young voters. And Charlotte does an excellent job in her journalism of highlighting that actually there's not much by way of policy that attracts young people nowadays to the Conservative Party, whether or not that is through housing policy, whether or not that's through university policies. There's not very much attracting young folk to the Conservative Party, and that is a big concern for me, because in the long term, I want people to be thinking, you know, I want to vote Conservative one day. And what we're seeing is the shift that happens, I think it's around the age of 40, where people move from being more left-wing to more right-wing economically, isn't happening, and policies like this don't help.
Well, is there anything attracting anyone to the Conservative Party? I think that's the question. What do you think of that, Danny?
Well, look, I agree with my learned colleague, possibly for the first time of the afternoon. It makes sense. A lot of sense spoken there. And things are never easy. Things are never binary. But,
well, most things worth having aren't easy, Danny. But no. What have you found, then? Let's talk about...
Now, then, I want to know how you feel about the headline, because this is the Daily Mail headline. University warns students Old Man in the Sea contains graphic scenes. So now we're thinking about the word woke and warnings. OK? University warns woke students that Ernest Hemingway's classic novel Old Man in the Sea contains graphic scenes of fishing. But when you actually unpick the story, this is more a story about how graphic the film is. We can talk about whether you should be warned about it. But I wasn't aware. I thought maybe the film was just about him fishing like that and landing a few cod. But it's actually about him catching an 18-foot marlin. And he's unable to actually bring it into the boat. And so what he does, he holds onto the line and he basically, for 3 days, he just keeps a grip of it. And, of course, the animal's in incredible pain.
Aww.
Exactly. So initially, the Daily Mail was saying, woke this, woke that. But when you actually understand the story, I mean, lots of youngsters nowadays are vegetarian or they're vegan, and they worry and they care about sentient creatures, and I'm sure that's a sentient creature, an 18-foot marlow. But my story, the spin I'm putting on it is how graphic it is. Whether we should be warned about it or not, and I don't know whether that's a fair reflection from the Daily Mail, you know, introducing the word woke.
Well, I haven't read the book, so I don't really know.
But it's the movie as well.
Well, I haven't seen the movie either.
No.
So I don't really know still. But I don't really like to hear of things suffering, and I couldn't read a book or watch a film about something, the suffering of something for 3 days.
So do you think a student should be alerted to that?
If it's graphic, I wouldn't mind.
What do you think, Al?
But I'd still watch it if I wanted to.
I don't think there's any problem with warning people about something being graphic. I always think having more information is a good thing so people can make the choice which is right for them.
Yeah, because at the cinema you're given guidance, aren't you? If you're not 15, you can't watch the movie, and then on Sky it'll say this contains scenes of violence, drug use.
Have you seen it?
No, because I hate animal
I've never even heard of the film.
No, Ernest Hemingway. You heard of him?
We've heard of him.
I've heard of a cocktail which is named after Ernest Hemingway.
You're kidding.
The Ernest Hemingway cocktail.
I mean, I can't remember what's in it,
so
most
many.
of the time that I've drunk it, I can't
Forgotten
remember
everything
what's
after.
happened. But I would recommend it. If you ever see a cocktail with Hemingway in it, I would just absolutely buy it.
OK, great. Albie, what's your next one then?
So my next story is about the price of fish and chips, which is set to rise
already.
to over £10 for the first time ever. But I just wonder where people are getting their fish and chips from, because my local chippy, the fish and chips are definitely over £10, but obviously, you know, there's some London waiting in there because everything's more expensive down here. But no, it is pretty surprising that each ingredient, as a result of the cost of living crisis and other factors, are leading to the nation's favourite dish being much more expensive.
Oh, I love fish and chips.
I love fish and chips. I actually have the ingredients, the components of a Hemingway cocktail.
Do you?
If you're interested, the components of a Hemingway, it's the Hemingway daiquiri, is also known as the Papa Doble or the Hemingway Special. The popular classic cocktail is named after the writer Ernest Hemingway, who Albie's never heard of, one of the greatest English literary figures.
I have heard of
He
it.
hasn't.
Oh, you have now?
We've all heard
Only
of it.
because of
We've
the
heard of
cocktail.
I just haven't seen the film or that.
OK, 2 ounces of light rum, half an ounce of maraschino liqueur, which is cherry, I think, half an ounce of freshly squeezed grapefruit juice, 3/4 of an ounce of freshly squeezed lime juice, 1/4 of an ounce of simple syrup, lime wheel for garnish.
I'm salivating.
Back to fish and chips. You're right, everything's more expensive in the capital.
Of course it is. It's the capital city. What would you expect? Well, listen, on today's show, we've been asking, are Britain's armed forces ready for war? And according to our Twitter poll, 33% of you say yes. So 67% of you must say no. I'm going to say a big thank you to my panel broadcaster, Danny Kelly. Thank you very much. And also co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albie Amankona. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your company. And as ever, thank you to you for joining me at home and also for all of your thoughts and views. I'm back on Dubes & Co. actually tomorrow. I'll be doing that from Monday to Thursday from 6 till 7. I'll leave you with the weather forecast. Have a fabulous Sunday.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, the UK is looking fine and sunny with a little cloud and rain possible in the west. Let's take a look at the details. Turning cloudier in the southwest this evening. The cloud could be thick enough to bring the odd spot of rain for a time. It'll be breezy, especially along southern coast. The southeast of England will end the day with continued dry and sunny conditions for all. There'll be a brisk southerly breeze. Increasing amounts of patchy clouds will continue to spread eastwards across southern and western Wales this evening. It'll turn increasingly breezy here too. In contrast, it'll be a fine end to Sunday across all parts of the Midlands. There'll be plenty of sunshine with a rather brisky southerly breeze, feeling quite spring-like. The northeast of England will also end the day dry with plenty of sunshine. There'll be a brisk southerly wind, especially along the coast, and temperatures will dip quickly after sunset. There'll be a west-east split across Scotland this evening with dry and sunny weather for eastern areas and cloudy conditions in the west with a little rain possible. Patchy cloud and sunny spells across Northern Ireland, but thicker cloud and rain also approaching from the west throughout the evening. The winds will increase too. Cloud, rain and stronger winds will edge in from the west overnight, the rain turning heavy at times.